George Fant is coming back to Seattle for his second stint with the Seahawks, but is there more than meets the eye with him signing a new contract to return to the Pacific Northwest? I'll be breaking it all down in our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Kent, Washington, or over in Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks bringing back an old friend in George Fant. Could there be more to it than simply adding insurance at the tackle position? I'll be diving into that. Plus, Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars will be joining us to break down new Seahawks safety Rayshawn Jenkins and what he's going to bring to Seattle's defense and secondary. It's a jam-packed episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Now for your lead story here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Amid a flurry of moves on the first official day of free agency, the Seahawks made 4 outside signings, bringing back one player who has played for the organization previously in George Fant. At the time of the show yesterday, we did not have details on Fant's contract, but that has changed. Aaron Wilson, who works for one of the radio stations down in Houston, is a longtime NFL insider, a credible NFL insider, has a lot of insight on contracts. He posted that George Fant's contract is a 2-year deal with a maximum value of $14 million. That would be $7 million per year. That would make George Fant one of the highest paid backup tackles in the entire NFL. He gets a $3.7 million signing bonus. Now, what we don't know about this contract, how much of that up to $14 million is based off of incentives, what's the base salary, those details have yet to be revealed, and that will be telling in terms of what kind of contract the Seahawks gave George Fant. But the fact that this deal is worth up to $14 million, you've got this signing bonus of almost $4 million for a player that's bounced around, has been a starter at both tackle positions, but certainly has not been a guy that teams have been hanging on to for more than a year or two at a time, has been inconsistent at times. To give him that kind of a contract, it brings back some concern in regard to Abraham Lucas, who missed all but 6 games last year in his second season, dealing with what Pete Carroll called at one point a chronic knee condition. He originally said it wasn't an injury. I mean, you look at the timeline back last year, and there's a reason why the Seahawks could have some apprehension here about Abraham Lucas's health moving forward, and they would want to have somebody that has started a lot of games in the NFL like what George Fant has. You look back at how things transpired last year. This has been a really mysterious timeline with Abraham Lucas. He lands on injured reserve with what Carroll called a non-injury, just a sore patellar tendon, which that always alarms, and at least turns my alarm on with that kind of an injury. That was on September 13th, and this is the same injury that in the previous season cost Abraham Lucas 1 game. He missed a game against the Jets in December of his rookie year, came back and played pretty well at the end of the season. So it seemed like that injury was going to be a non-factor, and yet it cropped back up at the beginning of this past season. And initially, I think a lot of people, including myself, were like, well, this might be one of those stints where he's out for 4 games. He's out the minimum amount, and then he's back. He ended up missing 10 games. And by late October, before he had been activated, Pete Carroll said that Lucas was still dealing with discomfort. He'd started running and working out, but clearly the knee was not recovering the way that they hoped it would after he received an injection in September. He comes back in late November. He starts 5 games. He's platooning with Jason Peters for a few of those games, re-aggravates the knee. It gets to a point where he just can't play through it anymore. Week 17 against Steelers, midway through the game, exits just like he did against the Rams in week 1. A couple days later, he's back on injured reserve, and he missed the season finale. Seahawks missed the postseason. There's a reason that there is concern for fans, and it appears there's some concerns, some reservations for the organization. John Schneider, when asked at the Combine about Abraham Lucas's status after undergoing surgery, first he was just asked, did he have surgery? Schneider acknowledged that he did. And then he was asked, do you think this corrects the problem? And he said, hopefully, yes. It did not sound like the most optimistic answer that you would expect with something like that. So it looks to me like the Seahawks are more than just trying to have an insurance policy here in George Fant. I think that there is some reservation within the organization. Are we going to be able to get a full season to this point out of Abraham Lucas? They need to see him get on the field and stay on the field. And then at that point, maybe these concerns can be eased, but they wanted to have somebody that they know has started games at both positions, can jump right into the lineup and play at a high level with the way things went last year. Stone Forsythe is still on the roster. Had some moments last year where he looked solid, but he also had some really rough games as well. They're looking for more consistency. From that standpoint, it's understandable, but this kind of an investment, potential investment, it tells me the Seahawks are guarding themselves. Hey, there could be a potential possibility here that George Fant is going to play a lot of snaps, and it's not going to be as a sixth offensive lineman. We're not looking at the offense that was ran by Brian Schottenheimer when George Fant was last in town, where they ran a lot of 6 offensive line sets, those jumbo packages. Ryan Grubb did not run a lot of 12 personnel in general at Washington. I'm expecting a lot more 1 tight end sets with more receivers on the field in his offense. So you're not going to be seeing number 74 as eligible very often, maybe in goal line situations. This contract is based on the fact that the Seahawks have to believe internally that there is a chance that George Fant is going to end up playing quite a few snaps. And if this ends up being a situation where they feel like Lucas isn't going to be able to get through all the games playing 100% of the snaps, that creates long-term question marks right there. But now you at least have another guy in George Fant who has started a lot of games in the NFL. He's familiar playing with the Seahawks. And certainly that is the type of player that you're wanting to bring in. But we'll see what all the contract details are. I still think there's a really good chance this is going to be a pretty small cap hit this year. So from that perspective, it's not going to be that big of an investment. But giving out a contract like this that's worth up to $14 million, the Seahawks are being proactive. And I think that there's a reason behind that. You look at that timeline with Abraham Lucas, I do think that they have some questions about his health long term. They need him to go out there and squash those concerns by being able to play, stay healthy, and not have this issue crop up again. But I think that the organization is wondering if that's a possibility or not at this point. So bringing in a veteran like George Fant, who quite frankly last year was better than Abe Lucas in the games that they played. You look at the numbers, Fant played a lot more snaps. So obviously he gave up more pressures, but Lucas gave up 17 pressures on just 270 total offensive snaps. George Fant played over 900 and gave up 30. Abe Lucas gave up almost as many sacks. His pass blocking efficiency rate ranked 77th in the league at 94.4%. George Fant was 29th at 96.8%. Again, not equal sample sizes. We know Abraham Lucas was playing with knee discomfort. He couldn't generate the push, the power that he's accustomed to doing, but still, the Seahawks are bringing in a tackle that has started a lot of games and quite frankly was the better player of the two last year overall. They are trying to guard themselves because I believe there is some reservation within the organization about Lucas's health. Now, I'm hoping that that ends up being caution that doesn't really matter and he's able to come back healthy. He very well could come out in training camp and look great and not have any more issues. That's what everybody's hoping for. But I think at this point, with the way that things have transpired, the fact that this knee has been troublesome for more than a year for Abraham Lucas, and it didn't necessarily sound like John Schneider was fully optimistic about, well, this should take care of it. Hopefully, yes, was his response. It just feels like the Seahawks are trying to guard themselves here, and that this is not just your simple hedge, the traditional hedge signing. There is a really good chance in their mind that they're going to need to play him at some point at that right tackle position with what Abe Lucas is dealing with. So that is something that I think is worth monitoring here as free agency goes on. I don't think this move would have happened this early in free agency if the Seahawks were not trying to be aggressive, being proactive, making sure that they've got a really good insurance policy there. And they're going to pay a premium for that if George Fant has to play. But that's the way that they're going to be structuring it with his injury situation. Coming up next, we're going to zip over to one of the top defensive free agent signings for the Seahawks, Rayshawn Jenkins. I'm going to be joined by my good friend Tony Wiggins from Locked On Jaguars, and he's going to detail what the Seahawks should expect from their new safety in the secondary. That'll be coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to start ripping your hair out when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and you get to view the views from your seat online. They've got a best price guarantee as well. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. If you want to see the first and second round of the NCAA tournament coming up next week, thanks to Game Time's awesome flash deals feature and a detailed stadium map, you can find full weekend passes to the NCAA tournament for under $225. It's super easy. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the very best price. If you end up finding tickets in the same section row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets for sporting events and concerts with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined here on our Thursday episode by my good friend and co-host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, Tony Wiggins. You can follow him at Shop Talking Wig, and always good for a laugh, and I'm sure we'll have a few of them here as we roll here. But Wig, I'm looking at this latest signing for the Seattle Seahawks. They released Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams, who were making a ton of money. They released them before the start of free agency, and everybody was wondering, when are the Seahawks going to sign a safety? They have nobody on the roster away from Julian Love that has any experience on defense, and they answered that call on the first official day of free agency, signing Rayshawn Jenkins, who last played for the Jaguars. He was a cap casualty a few weeks ago, and I guess I'll start off with that. How surprised were you that they moved on from him? Because you look at some of the advanced metrics, and Jenkins had really good coverage numbers last year for Jacksonville.
I wasn't surprised because when they initially made the signing, by the way, the Jaguars also had signed Shaq Griffin from Seattle. Yeah. I think the same year. They've been doing things in 2 and 3 year increments here. It's almost like the transfer portal when it comes to Jacksonville because they can't get it right. And then it turns into a CYA cover your you-know-what situations. But I was not surprised because of the way that they structure contracts around here. But he's a good player, man. He's solid, and I think Seattle's going to love him.
And I was wondering when this move happened. Obviously, we've seen the Calvin Ridley news now going to the Tennessee Titans, and it just feels like from an outsider's perspective, I don't cover the Jaguars, but it seems like some of the moves they were making to open up cap space, really they were dedicating that to getting Calvin Ridley locked up. And now here you are with him playing for the Titans, and you've had players like Rayshawn Jenkins who played really well for you for the last 3 years, and he's no longer on your roster. So it feels like it's a double-edged sword for this Jaguars team.
Well, it does if you're not used to it. If you look at it from the outside, it looks like a double-edged sword. But if you're inside, it looks like business as usual. Because what it seems is when you have a franchise, and you guys don't understand, it's because of the 12th man and how successful you were under Pete Carroll. When you have a franchise that is used to being the doormat, sometimes people settle for 9 wins, right? And I think that they viewed a guy like Raysean as a guy who could help us get from under that, but they don't think he can get them to the next level, right? So that's why they were able to let him go. And I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand the business side of it. There's 2 things. The business side of it is one thing. The practical side is another, because when we watch games on Sunday and fans watch games on Sundays, they don't sit there and they don't see salaries. They see numbers on the jerseys, but that number is not indicative of what their cap figure is, right? So what happens is we sort of conflate or blend these two things together when really they don't really matter like that. Trey, he's going to be a very, very solid player. In fact, two of the biggest plays that were made in 2022 were by Rayshawn Jenkins. I don't know if you guys remember, but the game where Trevor Lawrence threw 4 interceptions in the first half against the Chargers in the playoffs, Rayshawn Jenkins was the one who actually made a lot of those plays that prevented that from, being what it was. And then before that, to even get to the playoffs, the Tennessee Titans game, they were driving with 2 minutes to go, and Rayshawn Jenkins blitzed and caused the fumble that allowed Josh Allen to scoop the ball up and run it back. Rayshawn Jenkins got a pick 6 against Dallas in a critical game down the stretch that ended the game. It was a walk-off. So he's almost the type of guy that we look up and say we appreciate him and we understand the business side of it. But what are the Seattle Seahawks getting? They are getting a player who's going to come every day, be a professional. And my nephew sold him a truck, by the way. He sold him a truck that's teal colored. I'm sure he's going to have to paint it. But the thing is, he's just a good guy in the locker room. He's a hard worker. You will not be deficient at that safety spot. He's not necessarily a box safety, but he's not necessarily a free safety. He's a strong safety that kind of gives you a mix of both, and he gets in and gets mixed in on the action. So I think you guys will be very, very happy with what you get.
That leads perfectly into what I was going to ask you next when it comes to the play style, because I've watched a lot of Rayshawn Jenkins. In fact, when he was with the Chargers, I actually had highlighted him as a player a few years ago that I thought, if Seattle wants to go a different direction at the safety position, this could be a player that would make a lot of sense for them. But obviously ended up in Jacksonville. That was outside of Seattle's price range. But he is kind of a unique player in the sense that it doesn't necessarily feel like there is a true safety position for him, and that he is a guy you can move around some. And maybe he's one of those jack of all trades, not elite at any one thing style player, though. So I guess from my perspective and Seahawks fans' perspective, they've got Julian Love, who's kind of a similar player that moves around a lot. Where do you see his best fit coming to Seattle as far as where you line him up, how you utilize him?
That's a great question, because when you've had success, you always look for guys that have done things the way you did them when you were successful. He's not Cam Chancellor. And I think the problem with Seattle in the past, forgive me if I'm wrong, but they thought Jamal Adams was the box safety that Cam Chancellor was, but with a whole bunch of special effects, and they traded a bunch of stuff for him, and it didn't work out. He's also not Earl Thomas. And I think from the Jaguars' perspective, everyone has tried to emulate the Pete Carroll defense without the understanding that the reason why it worked, he played Earl Thomas there because Earl Thomas is special. So everybody's tried to do that. You can't do it unless you get Earl Thomas or Ed Reed. You feel me? So it's not like you can just create a defense and then all of a sudden just plug and play guys. That's not what he is. What he is a complete football player. He's going to come. He's going to bring his lunch pail every single day. He's going to cover, especially in the flats and those tight ends. And then if you need a guy who can disguise a blitz and come off the edge, like lined up in the slot on the tight end, and all of a sudden he blitzes and makes a sack for a quarterback and makes a big play. That's who he is. He is consistent. He is a B-plus guy. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. He's not an A guy, but he's also not a C guy. He's a B-plus guy in the fact that he brings maximum effort. He's always in shape. He's always about the game, and he's going to do exactly what the scheme allows him to do and ask of him. And you guys should be very, very happy to have him at the price that you got him.
And what really intrigues me from a schematic standpoint, this is not going to be Pete Carroll's defense because Pete Carroll is no longer the coach. So there's a little bit of unknown because Mike McDonald, the new coach, is not going to have the same players he had in Baltimore. He's not going to be able to run some of the same stuff schematically that he was able to do successfully there because of the personnel differences. And yet, at least based on the film that I have watched in the past with Rayshawn Jenkins, I have seen a guy that he isn't a Cam Chancellor type, as you said. He's not somebody that's going to come up and just rock people, but he also is a capable tackler, over 100 tackles each of the last 2 years. And so I almost get the sense that this could be a guy. He's not going to be the Kyle Hamilton type. He's not that big, but he is a guy that is going to be able to offer them some of the same traits that we've seen from Baltimore. Their secondary with Marlon Humphrey, even where they've slid him inside, they've put him in the box, different stuff. And it just seems like one of those guys that you can have some formational flexibility with that does seem like a good fit for Mike Macdonald's defense.
Corbin, what you said is exactly right. I almost think you're sitting here in my head when you brought up Baltimore, because, and I didn't even remember that Mike Macdonald is your coach. So the thing is I was already thinking about that. When you watch the Ravens play, it seems like they always have not 4, not 5, about 6, 7 guys they rotate, and guys just keep making tackles in critical situations.
Yep.
That is exactly what he is. He's another piece in a secondary that provides athleticism and the ability. Like I said, he's not a thumper. We ain't talking about Sean Taylor here or Troy Polamalu, but what we are talking about is someone who, quote unquote, does their job. And in a situation where you're not expecting too much, he's probably going to give you more than you expect when you're not expecting too much. Now, if you're expecting the guy to be a savior, that's not him. The thing is when you blend him in a system where you have like-minded people, he is the type of dude that is going to be sound and responsible where it comes to the scheme, and he's going to show up every single day, and he's not going to be a liability. So therefore, what we call him is he's a pro.
And I know Seahawk fans, that is going to be music to their ears, because there have been issues the last couple of years, a lot of problems with gap integrity and botched coverage assignments, guys not being on the same page, and they need a veteran leader. They let go of Quandre Diggs, who was one of those guys. Bobby Wagner's now gone for the second time in 3 years. They're making changes at linebacker. They need that experienced veteran that also has a locker room presence, which it sounds like Rayshawn Jenkins is going to bring that in. And I really appreciate all of your insight on this player, because he is a guy who, as I've mentioned already in the show, I was intrigued by him before Jacksonville signed him. And now getting the opportunity, you mentioned he's a B-plus player. Listen, those are the kind of guys you want to sign in free agency as long as the price is right. You don't want to jump out and sign those guys on day one, but Seattle clearly identified him as a guy that they were intrigued by. They visited with him on Monday, the first day of the legal tampering period, and they were able to get this deal done quickly when the 49ers and Packers were also very interested in him. So I think Seahawk fans are going to be really excited for the opportunity to watch this guy play and be able to plug into this defense that I think he's going to be a good fit for as that guy that does his job.
And they should be, because that's exactly what he's going to do. And he has a propensity to make big plays. He's Johnny on the spot. He's one of those guys that if a loose ball is there, he's always around, man. You miss him from our perspective when it comes to re-signing him. I understand where the Jaguars are because they're trying to do something else, but this is strictly a team building issue. You always want guys like Rayshawn Jenkins on your roster, and I think the Seahawks fans will be very, very happy that they got him.
Tony, as always, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, your unique insight. And as always, if the Seahawks have a player that comes your guys' way, I look forward to the opportunity to reciprocate and chat with you.
I know you will, man. And shout out to the Seahawks fan. I got to come up there and eat some of that seafood, man. You said I was going to give you a laugh, so I'm going to give you one right now. I'm in Florida. We got great seafood.
Well, I guess in Florida, you've probably had some really good seafood too.
Yeah, and I grew up in D.C. also, so we got some good seafood. But I got to come up there, man. Maybe it tastes a little different. I don't know. I got people that came up to Whidbey Island in the Navy and some places and out in Tacoma at the Air Force Base at McCord, and they always told me, man, you need to come up here. So maybe I need to come up there and see Corbin and hang out a little bit. You know, we'll see what's happening.
Just make sure it's this summer. You don't want to come anytime earlier than that when you're getting flooded out by the rains.
Yeah,
that's
no
Tony
doubt.
Wiggins, Locked On Jaguars. When we come back next, going to have the latest free agent roundup. Who are the best players after 2 days of free agency that are available for the Seahawks to try to sign? We'll be right back. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Robinhood Retirement. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. The offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risks, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA is available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC. Member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s. As always, thanks for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Make sure to check out, as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. For baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview, coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m., be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts in the Locked On Podcast Network, and find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. We are now in day 2 of official free agency in the NFL. The Seahawks at this point have not made any moves today. Yesterday signed 4 outside free agents, made some big moves with their tendered restricted free agents. They extended Darrell Taylor. It was a really busy first day. Nothing going down yet as of today, but we know that more moves are coming. They have to. The Seahawks have a lot of big holes on their roster. Keeping that in mind, yesterday Rob Rang and I looked at the best available players at a couple position groups. I'm going to take a dive into what I think the Seahawks need to do moving forward from here. As I mentioned in the first segment, you've added that extra depth at tackle with George Fant. You've got a tight end in Pharaoh Brown that's got some experience, brings some blocking ability. You're able to get Rayshawn Jenkins, who we just got some great insight from Locked On Jaguars host Tony Wiggins on. They've made some interesting moves in the last hours, but there's still a lot of work that is left to be done. So to me, the first thing that must be addressed for the Seahawks now, next in free agency, you've got to get at least one veteran off-ball linebacker, whether that's Tyrell Dodson from the Bills, whether that's going out and making a splash for Devin White from the Buccaneers. He's probably the biggest name that is still left unsigned on the market. Maybe you go after a reclamation project like an Isaiah Simmons from the Giants, formerly of the Cardinals. There are some names out there. I'm also going to throw this out there. There could be some trade possibilities. Last year, the Seahawks, according to my sources, had reached out to the Jaguars, and they were trying to figure out what it would cost to get Devin Lloyd, the former top pick from Utah, who the Seahawks loved coming out of the Pac-12, didn't draft, and the Jaguars got him. They were turned down. Maybe they revisit that now. Jacksonville is going to be looking to try to recoup some talent, especially at the receiver position. So Jaguars, that might be a fit there, getting Devin Lloyd potentially, and there could be some other trade options out there on the market as well. But either way, the Seahawks need to get a veteran. They didn't bring back Bobby Wagner. They didn't bring back Jordan Brooks. They've let a lot of other really solid players like Patrick Queen go elsewhere on the market. They really haven't done anything there. You can't go into the season with a bunch of rookie linebackers. So they need to get a veteran. To me, that is priority 1, 2, and 3 right now for the Seahawks, whether it's through free agency or making a trade. They've got to do something to address that deficiency, because right now your starters are probably John Radigan and either Patrick O'Connell or Drake Thomas. Those are the 3 linebackers that are currently on the roster. They have a combined 0 starts on defense in the NFL. So that is still the biggest need for the Seattle Seahawks. Number 2, the second biggest need to me, it's the guard spot. And I'm going more specific here. You need to get a seasoned veteran. This is a very young offensive line. Yes, bringing in George Fant helps from the experience standpoint, but he's never played guard. They're not going to be asking him to slide into guard. That is not his position. They need to get somebody that has started a lot of games in the NFL. The two names that jump out to me, Kevin Zeitler's the obvious one. And I know a few years ago, there were reports out there he wanted to stay on the East Coast, wasn't interested in going to Seattle. But I think the Mike Macdonald effect, the fact that there's a relationship there, I think that opens up the door that maybe Kevin Zeitler would consider coming to Seattle and playing for the Seahawks. Or Dalton Reisner, who I think is a very underrated player. He had to wait till September to sign with the team last year, but this guy has started a bunch of games in the league. He's a really sound pass protector, and he's still under the age of 30. That would be a player that I'd be willing to look at. The guard market has dried up, and I think you've got to sign one of those two guys, and then you think you draft somebody early at the guard position as well. But I think that guard spot, like linebacker, those to me are the two biggest holes that have yet to be addressed here. Nick Harris is not going to be playing guard for the Seahawks. I expect that he's going to be competing at the center position. Maybe they look at him over there, but I think that he is mostly a center in the National Football League. His skill set best fits that. They still need to add depth at the guard position because right now they don't have a starter at left guard, and Anthony Bradford's the only guard on the roster. So they're going to have to make a move one way or another there. We were talking about Rayshawn Jenkins the last segment. One thing that Mike Macdonald did frequently in Baltimore, he played a lot of three safety sets, which mitigated the linebacker position a little bit. They only had to have two of their linebackers on the field. The two they had were very, very good in Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, but they played a lot of three safety sets. If you look at Seattle's roster, even after adding Rayshawn Jenkins to go with Julian Love, who's going to be that third safety? Devin Witherspoon is a corner. He's going to be playing the nickel spot, and he's going to play on the outside as well. Jarek Reed's coming off an ACL tear. They just don't have experience there now, even away from the two guys that they have in Jenkins and Love. I think that is the next position that is going to be hit on. And I could see the Seahawks making not a big splash at this stage in free agency, but maybe somebody like a Julian Blackmon that is a true free safety. There are not many of those guys on the market right now that are true single high safeties. The guys they brought in, Rayshawn Jenkins can play that, but not necessarily a huge strength. That, as Tony Wiggins was saying, he's kind of one of those guys you just move around, you can plug and play. Maybe not exceptional at any one thing, but they need a true free safety. And maybe they pursue that in free agent or in the draft instead of free agency. But Julian Blackmon, maybe consider bringing back Quandre Diggs later in free agency at a lower price. There's been nothing about interest in him to this point. They got to get a true free safety so they can run some of those three safety sets that Mike Macdonald loves to run and did so well in Baltimore. So I can see them still being active there, and that's something that I would have on my checklist. Try to continue seeing what's out there. Is there a true free safety that I can bring in to complement Rayshawn Jenkins and Julian Love, who are more versatile players that I don't want to say are positionless, but they're guys that you can plug and play at multiple spots, and moving them around, that's when you can get your best out of those two guys. So I think another safety would make sense. And last but not least, let's go to the quarterback position. Now, this is going to raise some eyebrows a little bit here. We just saw the news here a few hours ago. Desmond Ridder, formerly the Falcons, traded to the Arizona Cardinals straight up for receiver Rondale Moore. So we just saw one of those quarterbacks from the 2022 draft class get moved. Washington is picking early in the first round, is expected to draft one of these top quarterbacks in this year's draft. Sam Howell very well could be available, and the Seahawks suddenly don't have a second quarterback on the roster. Of course, there's going to continue to be noise about drafting a quarterback in April, and I very easily could see that happening, whether it's in the first round or waiting till day 2 or even day 3. I know John Schneider wants to draft a quarterback. At the same time, Sam Howell is a very young QB, and he has shown flashes. He's been inconsistent. There's been bad games too, but Washington last year was a dumpster fire. This is a guy that's got the arm talent, underrated athlete, and there have been flashes. Somebody messaged me this earlier. I don't think it's a hot take. I think Sam Howell would be a more intriguing trade piece than Justin Fields because you have seen more competent passing from him in the NFL to this point than what you've seen from Justin Fields. And I don't think you'd have to worry about trading away a second or third rounder to get him. I think Washington would give him up for a day 3 pick at this point because they're planning on moving on to their own quarterback. It's a different coaching staff now. They've got that high draft pick in the first round, top 5 pick. They're going to be looking to pick a quarterback there. So how would make sense if you're not going to go the trade route? There's a few free agents out there that you could still look at, but Seattle needs to get another quarterback with veteran experience on this roster, or in the case of Sam Howell, get somebody that could still be a potential starter for you that you can bring in, because you're obviously not going to go into the season with one quarterback. And doing this does not curtail you from drafting a QB in April either. You could trade for Sam Howell and then turn around and draft a quarterback fairly early, especially if all you're giving up is a 6th or 7th rounder. Why not take that chance? With Justin Fields, you're probably going to have to give up more than that to be able to get him. And again, I just think Sam Howell has shown more as a passer in the NFL than what Justin Fields has to this point. So they need to do something at a quarterback position here in the next few weeks, get somebody else on the roster, whether through free agency or a trade. There's still some veterans out there that might make some sense to kick the can on. There's a few teams that are looking to trade guys like Sam Howell. So look for John Schneider to be working the phones on that front. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up on our Blue Friday episode, we'll have the latest on free agency. And with March Madness just around the corner, it's time for our all-time Seahawks bracket. Nick Lee and I are going to have a lot of fun with that. Make sure you are listening into the show. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Go Hawks.